So I want to get our new participants involved straight away. And Harold, I think I'll start with you because we just heard from Tina about the degree to which now investors, forward-thinking investors, are demanding that business operations be green, if we can use that overarching word. So how is the shipping industry shaping up? You've got big plans for Arctic expansion, but is it going to be green shipping in the future?
Yes, I think so. And the big push in our industry now is to decarbonize our industry. So that's the big push on international level, and it's a big push domestically here in Norway. And for now, as Tina mentioned, in Norway, we are leading in the industry when it comes to new solutions for dramatically reducing the emissions from our ships.
And for those of us who are not shipping experts, just outline some of the ways in which you are responding to the demand for much cleaner shipping.
In the coastal shipping, we use electricity, but the big question here is what kind of fuel do you need, or what kind of energy can you use for the longer distances, the transoceanic voyages? And to be honest, there we have no solution today. There is no quick fix in this area, and there is no zero-emission solution to sail without emission from Asia to Europe. But we have to invent it, and I think there will be a lot of investments into new solutions with considerably lower emissions within the shipping industry over the next years, and that's a great opportunity as well for both the Norwegian maritime cluster, but also for the Arctic region.
But if it's not yet invented, does that mean that we should be very careful about the degree to which we express all of these grand ambitions for opening up northern sea routes and all of that? I.e., the talk is of a vast expansion of long-haul Arctic shipping when you're saying the technology to make it relatively clean does not exist.
It doesn't exist today, not for a zero-emission sailing through the Northeast Passage as well, even it's 40% shorter than through the Suez Canal. But I think, and I will also put a little bit pessimism into the future when it comes to trans-polar sailings. I think it will be, put it another way, based on numbers. Last year we had some 30 sailings through the Northeast Passage, and we have 18,000 through the Suez Canal every year. So the volume here is very small, and I think it will be small for the foreseeable future due to the huge investment you have to put in the ships to sail in these areas, due to the bureaucracy in these areas, and hopefully also due to the fact that if we are able to reach the 1.5 degree scenario, less ice will melt, hopefully.
Interesting, yeah. Carolina, I'm going to turn to you. I think I'm right in saying that WWF has launched a blue economy report, isn't that right? I think a year or two ago. I just wonder, when you're compiling these sorts of reports, do you seek to work in close partnership with business, or do you in some senses regard business as the enemy?
Well, I think we work with the business sector as if you're part of the problem, you're part of the solution, if you are the solution. So some business industries, like fossil fuel, we don't see part of the solution, and we don't engage actively with in partnerships.
Even though we've heard a lot today about being realistic, it's going to be a long transition away from fossil fuels, so the fossil fuel industry is going to be here with us for decades to come, particularly in Norway, which has vast assets. Shouldn't you work with them rather than just
we do have dialogue with them, but it also is a matter of resources and shaping the future we want. And the future we want lies in the renewable. It's in a low-carbon future, and that's not a target set from WWF or the NGOs. We have the Paris Agreement that says kind of where are we going as a world. And we are going to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees. We have to cut emissions in a dramatic phase. And that's the reality. And then we can talk about the different activities you can do and need to do to get there and find the right solution. But I think the most interesting for us to see is how do we identify the mechanism from going from the current solution to the new solution? How do we get the market to it? How do we get the policymakers? How do we get the framework to get to have this change put in action and not just having words behind it.
I suppose what I'm interested in, I mean, there's a sort of grid of interests here. You're obviously a campaigning organization. There's the power of government, and we've talked a lot about that over the last couple of days, and then there's the importance of the business sector. Do you feel that the business sector only moves when government compels it to move through regulation, or are you seeing businesses of many different stripes and sectors in the Arctic North now that are looking to, change what they do and do it in a more sustainable and a cleaner way, not because government's ordering them to and telling them to and setting new rules, but because they just see it as in their own long-term business interest to do that?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think we are a campaigning organization. We are an organization that tries to keep track on that we take care of our natural resources and that we get the actions that we need to get more nature and less emissions, to simplify it. But to your questions, I think in a lot of cases we see that the business sector in some sectors are more progressive than policymakers, and it takes time to make legislation and get enforcements in place that work as well. So we choose to work with a sector that is the most progressive and that can put action behind words and actually get them to be economically sensible. And if you look at the finance sector and just how the finance sector now is talking about climate risk, nature risk, also ocean risk related to blue economy, that has changed dramatically. And that doesn't come from a view of kind of we are the new kind of want to take care of natural resources like WWF. It's because this makes sense from an economic point of view.
Yes, exactly. It's the new business environment, which, Tina, you clearly live with day by day, and it's changed a great deal over the last few years.
Absolutely, and it's going so fast as well. I think that is something to notice. You're seeing only from last year, last year it was okay, or last year the trend was that you divest in companies or sectors you don't like. This year it's not enough. It's not enough only to divest. You actually have to invest in something that pushes you a bit further to the climate agreement and to the sustainability goals. And something else as well, and we're already seeing that is affecting the oil industry, some of the oil producers. That is that it's not enough any longer to invest a bit within the green sector. You actually have to show that your business idea or your business strategy is aligned with the Paris Agreement, and that is also a big change happened, from the last year. So it's no doubt.
But who's the judge of that?
The judge is so far it has been investors.
Right. Well,
and you could say, is that right or not that they're going to? But I think the way that we're measuring risk, because we noticed we didn't do that properly during the financial crisis. We need to rebuild confidence with clients and with the audience. And I think to do so, we're actually trying to put a price on climate changes. We think that's a big risk that can threaten the economy. And we also see that we've started with that, put a price on that risk. We started to see that might have conflicting ideas. So now we're also starting to include other sustainability factors, such as biodiversity, for example, or human rights. But we started with climate risk because that's the most pressing.
Well, it's fascinating. So here we are with a very different business. Well, go on, yeah.
Yeah, but I think I will add on that every businesses want to be part of the solution, of course. If you are only a part of the problem, you will be out of business in the long term. So every business is dependent on being part of the solution, and
or at least being seen to be part of the solution.
But this is not about wrapping. I think it's about also about practices and the real activity. Yeah. And that's why I disagree a little bit with Carolina, which when she said that oil and gas is not part of the solution. Because I think oil and gas can be an important part of the solution when it comes to develop new technology. And for some weeks ago, we launched here in Norway new ambitions for our upstream oil and gas industry with an ambition of reducing the emission in the entire value chain by 40% by 2030 and be close to zero by 2050. And then we can use the industry and the activity to create new technology which could be used and utilized in other segments.
All right, well, I want to hear Vadim on that too, but I actually, at this point, want to bring Ingve in because you've been sitting very patiently, Ingve. What Tina's painting is very interesting. It's a new business environment. It's with a real price being put on climate change risk. How does this affect what you do on a daily basis? Because you're chairman of the board at PetroArctic, and I'm going to begin with a confession. I'm not entirely sure quite what PetroArctic does, so you're going to have to tell me.
The short version is that PetroArctic is an interest organization for more than 300 companies, most of them located in the northern part of Norway.
So it's a sort of a trade body? Or
it's a kind of organization where it's organized by members.
And the members are in the oil...
In the oil and gas business, but they're also providing services and goods to other services, primarily to the oil and gas business in the northern part of Norway.
Well, then what you've just been hearing is directly sort of relevant and germane to your business. And are you part of the solution, do you think?
Yeah, I think we are part of the solution, but a little bit more about what our members have created through 10 years, for example. They have delivered commodities and services to the oil and gas industry for more than 40 billion Norwegian crowns. And there are thousands of employees working in these companies. And if you shut down the light for this business overnight, then it will have a dramatic consequence. One example of what kind of impact the oil and gas industry has done to cities or communities in northern part of Norway is Hammerfest, which many of probably know. Going back to the first part of this century, the population went dramatically down. Young and old people moved from the city. There were no job opportunities. They didn't do any maintenance of buildings and houses. But then there came the decision to develop the LNG plant up in Hammerfest. And so within 10, 15 years, the city has changed dramatically. The optimism is back. Young people are coming back. There are job opportunities which are relevant, and they are, and also we can see that this city is now a city where people like to live, like to be, and it's very dependent on the oil and gas industry in the north.
But I suppose the question for this panel is whether it's being done in a way that is truly responsible.
What do you mean?
Well, the fact that Hammerfest has an LNG plant now and which it's generating jobs and income and prosperity, I get. But that's not necessarily long-term good news if it's not being done in a way that matches the new business environment that Caroline has been...
But I think that we are also part of the solutions. And as long as globally there is a demand for oil and gas, and why shouldn't we actually produce that oil and gas from the Norwegian continental shelf, where we produce with very low CO2 emission, much less than in many other places. And if we turn down the cranes or all the producing wells in Norway, that would be...
No, I get the argument, and we've aired the argument at some length in the panels already. I guess what I'm really trying to focus on now is this proposition that oil and gas, as Harold said, can change and transition in a way that actually does deliver it in a much more sustainable, cleaner way. That's what I'm getting to. And I don't know in the case of Hammerfest just how much, when they planned their infrastructure and
well, they are doing measures there every year actually to reduce the CO2 emission, and they are now they have also the first place also in the northern part of Norway where they inject the CO2 from the plant into the reservoir. So there are lots of things.
You mean a form of capture, carbon capture?
Yeah.
So, Carolina, you had your hand up for a bit.
Yeah, I don't know where to start. No, I think the main thing is that it doesn't matter how good we are currently in our oil and gas production when we know there is a limit on how many emission we can have. And I think the technology development that have happened in the oil and gas sector is phenomenal. We should be proud of it. We should use it. The brain capacity we have and competence we have in this country is phenomenal. Right now, what's happening is that the technology development is going also alternatives, just kind of the outlook of the industry also for oil and gas would look dramatically differently. But if you look at the big companies and their long-term plans, it's still oil and gas that is the majority. And it's not WWF who sets the boundary for the emission. It is what we have said, that the countries has come together in the Paris Agreement and how much we have to lower emissions. And the world needs energy. Doesn't necessarily need oil and gas, it needs energy. And that is something massive that we have to solve together. And using the technology, components that exist in the oil and gas sector would be the best way of Norway of doing that. But then we need to have another regime here in Norway on how do we develop alternative industries.
Of course, in the Arctic, this isn't just a challenge for Norway, it's all the Arctic nations have to think about this. Vadim, you were talking about NL putting more and more investment resources into renewables. So when you listen to Carolina and her deep concern about the continuation of investment in oil and gas, and her feeling that, you know, the skill sets which are involved in that should be put, you know, and redirected much more to renewables and to clean energy solutions. Would you say to her that's exactly what NL are doing, or is it, you know, if we're honest, is NL still massively and predominantly a fossil fuel company?
Well, I can say that we're working with our zero carbon strategy, and according with this strategy, we are aim to decrease the number of plants which is using gas and oil and coal, by the way. So the number of wind parks in Russia will grow in the nearest 5 years. We will try to reach, not Europe, of course, but we will try to reach the high level of using this energy, green energy made by wind parks and solar.
Is that a strategy that's coming from the center, from Moscow? Or?
No, it's from Rome. From Rome.
From Rome, yeah, exactly. So it's actually business taking the lead. It's not that you're following a...
No, we decided just...
Yeah, no, that is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree on that strategy, and Norway is an energy nation. We are big in hydropower, we are big in oil and gas, but in a way, my impression is that we have stopped our development of as an energy nation with the oil and gas, and I think that we should now focus on how can we develop further on as an energy nation within the renewable sector. And to put it simple, we could make it as profitable to invest in renewable as in oil and gas, and then I think we would have a lot of investments also in renewable energy, and that would be a good idea to take part in the transition. And what we see among our members in the Norwegian Shipyard Association is that the competence and the capacity and the ships developed originally for the oil and gas sector is also competitive in the renewable sector, and we now see that ships for services in the energy sector they are now utilized in renewable sector, but not in Norway. It's utilized in Denmark, in UK and Netherlands, everywhere else.
Yeah, Tina, you want to get in, because then I'm going to just shift focus slightly, because we don't want to spend the whole session talking about the energy business sort of proposition. We want to talk about other aspects of Arctic economic growth as well, but you go with your point.
Absolutely, because I think we have to remember here that approximately 95% of all the natural gas we are producing in this country goes via pipelines to Europe. 75% of the oil we're producing goes to Europe, so what's happening in Europe will have a big impact on the demand for oil and gas. So I think it's important if we can manage to get more renewable energy here, not only the energy production itself, but what kind of companies can we attract? Energy-intensive industry that could actually start working here, and so we can be competitive within the European space. I
mean, talking of that, don't you have you know, these huge sort of server, I don't know what one calls them, warehouses, factories,
or space technology? I guess that's
well, space technology too. But these high-tech but high-energy use facilities.
For example.
They would be, arguably they'd be ideal in the Arctic North, wouldn't they? If you can hook them up to renewable energy in tracts of land which are available and, fairly easy to get planning permission for.
For example, metal industry as well, battery technology, it's all very energy intensive. But the measure of actually how it's produced, what the footprint will be like, is very important in the future. That is something that will actually have an impact of how you're judged in the, or how you're rated within the financial sector. So if we could produce that with a lower climate footprint, that will be more competitive, at least in the European market and other markets in the future.
Okay, I'm going to get to questions in just a moment. Before I do that, though, we've got one of our Outlook contributors who's going to give us some thoughts on a slightly different take on the economic potential and the business potential in the Arctic North, because we're going to focus our attention right now on, I think, what's called bioprospecting and the degree to which the Arctic can be a center for development of new drugs and the sort of cutting-edge, innovative science that could be such an important part of the Arctic's future. So to hear a little bit more about that, I'm going to invite to give us a quick presentation Jeanette Hammer-Andersen, who's part of what's known as the MAR Bio project at the Arctic University in Tromsø. So over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to take the first few minutes just to briefly tell you what we do and hopefully show you that this could be a future business opportunity as well. Completely different what you heard so far. So what I'm saying as a headline here, Arctic marine organisms could be a source of novel medicine. That's sort of a statement that we already know is true from other organisms not coming from the Arctic, but the next one should be from Arctic. So what we focus on is the marine organisms sitting on the sea bottom, like sponges or even marine bacteria and marine fungi. We bring them into the lab. We test them to see if they have compounds in them that can inhibit antibiotic-resistant bacteria to grow, whether they can kill cancer cells. We try to then dig out, is there something new? Is the chemistry, has these molecules been seen by someone else before? We then try to see, okay, we have something new going on here. We optimize the chemistry. We have to move them on then to animal trials to see if they work in not only in the laboratories, to see if they can kill cancer cells in an animal model. That's the next step. And of course then the main goal is to come to patients. Clinical trials where we involve patients to test to see whether these molecules coming from these marine organisms can be a new treatment. But as you can see on my slide here, I put this academia industry, there's a bridge. Because the discovery of these new compounds is really good, we can find them. We have proven that by a recent project. We have found molecules that is inhibiting breast cancer cells. We're trying now to move it across the bridge because we know there is a translational gap between academia and industry sometimes. And now we're trying to move these projects across the bridge. We have some that already have passed the bridge. So we see that there are potential to find new medicines. So the challenge is now to pick out the right projects from academia to put them across the bridge. We are now looking for investors. We see that we get some interest. And I see that we can build this bridge through the rest of the world. But my challenge and my hope for this scenario is that we can build a bridge within the Arctic and build up the industry and enable us to put the tools to really put value for these molecules. We see these fantastic marine organisms. They have huge potential. We have discovered so many great molecules that have bioactive potential. So I really think that we now look for opportunities to build fund tools, attract a long-term investment, to build up, to really maximize the potential that we can get out of these marine organisms. So I really hope that coming together like this is something that we could discuss opportunities, because I think this is a business opportunity. The question is it an Arctic business opportunity? Thank you.
Jeanette, before you go, thank you for that. But before you go, I want to know your own opinion. Do you see the beginnings of a real sort of new industrial sector taking root in the north, in the Arctic, or do you fear that a lot of this know-how will stay, south of the Arctic? The bioprospecting may take place in the Arctic, but the commercialization, the industrialization of the products at the end of this chain across cross this bridge won't happen in the Arctic. What is your feeling?
That is my fear, that all on the pharmaceuticals, these really high value products, I see them, they are moving out of the Arctic region because there is the know-how and the big investments. But for nutraceuticals, cosmetics, think about macroalgae as a source of new ingredients. There you can see that there is a growing business in this area. So I think that doesn't have this long way to the market, doesn't have this high risk. So there are businesses developing, there are some biotech companies, but I think there is a huge potential to build up this bridge. You don't have to perhaps be the big pharma in the other end doing the big clinical trials, but that's of course a main goal. But you can build the bridge the way to get there in the end.
Well, thank you so much for your contribution. That's really interesting. And, and let's give her a big hand. And good luck with the next phase of your work. But actually, Tina, I'm interested to, you must have obviously listened, I'm imagining, with great interest to that. But when you're thinking about finance, you're thinking about business propositions, how easy is it to persuade, say, small, medium-sized, innovative enterprises to actually sort of come up to the Arctic region, to be based here and doing their work, making their investment, finding the right staff, finding the skill sets they need inside the Arctic, rather than sort of tapping into some of this knowledge and some of this potential, but not putting their roots down in the Arctic?
I think that has a lot to do with the municipalities as well. You know, what kind of tax regulations do they have? How could they actually offer, you know, because you're usually two people want to move, so, you know, you need to have access for a family, for example, and they need something important to do both. So I think, you know, if a municipality could offer, you know, space, lower taxes, for example, to establish at the very beginning of establishing a new industry, for example, or a new market, I think that could attract businesses.
Do you see that kind of creative approach to business development? I mean, I guess your knowledge is perhaps mostly of Norway, but so I guess we're talking of Arctic Norway, really. But do you see that sort of spirit to attract entrepreneurs into the Arctic region?
I mean, I've seen it, I don't know about the Arctic region, but I know about other places in Norway, for example, where we've seen Kongsberg, which is in the middle of Norway. How do they actually, they have a lot of technology there, but how could they manage to get people to move there, families to move there? So, you know, with these kind of policies, they do, yeah, as well.
How?
How? They lowered taxes, they offered, you know, babysitters, you know, schools, you know, the facilities for a family to live there.
So they're offering a way of life, but they're thinking about communities.
Absolutely.
And
I think it's interesting here as well, because places like Mo i Rana, for example, they are quite on the supply side there as well, at least what, in my understanding, you know, offering space to build, for example, battery, or building up a battery factory, for example. So, you know, I think being a bit forward-leaning and you know, opening up for, or actually offering to companies to come and settle there, I think that could help as well.
Thank you. I'm going to scan the room for hands and questions now, because we're focused on a range of issues about the way to expand economic growth and business activity and opportunity in the Arctic. We've covered everything from oil and gas to bioprospecting. So feel free to chip in with thoughts and questions. Sir, we've got your hand up over there, so we'll start with you and then we'll come to you.
Thank you. My name is Sjurdur Skåli. I'm from the Faroe Islands. Just input into this discussion of how this transition from fossil fuels to renewables is going to take place. Is it clever to let it over to the industry, to the companies themselves to find out to do the right thing and just hope they'll do it? Or should we make political decisions? Just an input from the Faroe Islands. There's no doubt there's oil in the underground around the Faroe Islands, and we've been drilling and searching for years and years. Seismic shootings, drilling one well, another well, and a third well. And companies have spent, you know, I don't have the exact numbers, but it must be billions and billions of euros trying to find oil. Nothing is found. Not a single drop is produced. No energy is produced. If this money had been invested in green energy, energy would definitely have been produced, and we would be in a better place than we are now. So shouldn't, if you were, for example, you 5 people were a government, would you say that when it comes to very deep water drilling, this is not a continuation of the industry we know, this is a new thing, because it's very deep, extremely deep, kilometers of water, and then kilometers of basalt underneath. It's a new thing, just as renewables is a new thing. Should we say that when it comes to going further north, to very deep water drilling, should we then say, we take a political decision, we don't let it over to the industry, we say, keep it in the ground?
Yes, well, very well put, and thank you for the point and the question. And what's the response?
Well, I have a good example. Our project, Kolska Wind Farm, more than 10 years actually. The Holland guys came in Murmansk region 10 years ago, and they started to research how to make a wind farm there. And so they've spent a lot of money, they've spent a lot of resources, but only 3 years ago there was a political decision that we have to make a green shift and to build up wind farms and solar farms. So in our case, it was a political decision, and the environment for these kind of projects was created. And as I said in my speech, the private-public partnership was created. The special agreements was created for the investors. But the main thing is that the business was quite open for these kind of projects. So the government knows our financial model. They knows our tariffs and how it's profitable our project will be in the next years. So they have counted for how many years we will reach our profits. And they have counted in according not with the European money, because we took our money from Sberbank, it's a Russian bank, with Russian percents. So everything was counted, and that was the political decision in this case. But if we are talking about small and medium enterprises, of course they have to save themselves somehow, and talk with government about business incubators, about government support and subsidies, and etc.
Quickly then, Tina, and I wanted to get Carolina on this as well, but go on.
Okay, I think you have a very good point, because I think if you actually want a green shift within your economy, you have to look at what kind of tools you have, and for example, the tax policy is one of the tools you could look at. So if you really want to change in the economy, you have to look at how the tax system is supporting that shift.
Yeah, and I mean, the speaker from the Faroe Islands was pretty much saying what you were saying, but he was putting it in very practical terms, saying, you know, look at the amount of money that was spent, and actually we never delivered a drop of oil even after all of this vast exploration expense.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of the story about do we continue with oil and gas or not, in terms of using the technology that is developed for other things compared to do investments in long-term projects. So the oil and gas drilling and the licenses that is now given in Norway in the Arctic is on production. They're first going to search, then they're going to develop to possible production, and it goes way beyond 2050 when we're going to be zero emission, almost zero emission in the world. And that's when we talk about stranded assets, that these are, you invest in something that is not going to be profitable or used in the future.
But if a cost is now being put on all investment decisions on climate change risk, then in future the investment decisions may be very different.
Absolutely, but it also is kind of how we developed oil and gas economy in Norway was a political census behind. It doesn't make sense necessarily in the beginning, and you didn't know how profitable it was going to be made. But it was a political decision that there were minor differences between the different political parties on direction and the setup, but it was wide political consensus on the development of oil and gas industry as one of our key industry for Norway. And that's the shift, or that willingness, that project for Norway into as an energy nation, as Harald said, from hydropower to oil and gas, that is currently lacking in Norway. That political consensus that we are going to be an energy nation that stands on different legs and not just the two of them. And what we see now is currently that the majority of the political decision is about how far north can we allow oil and gas licenses, instead of thinking, well, what can we develop that is not oil and gas? And just since I has the floor, it's a lot of talk about climate risk as well, but it's the ecosystem of the ocean who puts the boundaries on what we can develop. And Tina mentioned it shortly about the biodiversity risk, the nature risk in terms of further investments as well, because also with the development of renewables, it will have an impact on nature. So we also have to be in forefront on that in terms of how to develop renewable energy to make sure that we take care of nature at the same time. And with the case of developing the ocean floor in terms of finding the different drugs, we have mapped the moon better than the ocean floor. Mm-hmm. We know more about the moon's surface than the ocean floor. So with all of these big things and kind of how we're going to use the ocean now, how do we make sure that we have the science that we need before we can
Well, we have had lots of contributors talking about the expanding knowledge base, both under the seabed and on land in the Arctic, and not least because it's all being monitored from space, and we're going to hear a bit more from Nicholas in a second. But anyway, I know there was a question over here. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Hi, Antonia Juhas. I'm a journalist from the United States. I write most often for Rolling Stone magazine and Newsweek. And I actually, I first have a question for Tina. Can you comment on the banks that aren't following this model? JP Morgan Chase, for example, still investing really heavily in fossil fuels, and what you think they're up to. And then I also have a question for Nicholas, if I'll throw it out now. I'd love for you to comment on the Trump administration's launch of Space Force, and it's now a new branch of the U.S. military. It's funded. It has a logo. What you think about the militarization of space?
Right. Well, that's slightly off topic, but to be honest, I'm quite intrigued to hear what the answer is going to be. So when we get Nicholas back on the panel, which we will in a moment, we might sneakily get in a question about Space Force and indeed the logo, which looks very much like Star Trek, but maybe you don't have an opinion on that. Anyway, but the more germane, relevant point right now was to Tina, yeah.
I think you have a very good point, because so far the investors have been looking at the oil and gas industry, the coal industry, but what we feel now is that investors start looking at the banks, the financial institutions, the money managers. So I think that JP Morgan will have a challenge in the future, because the investors are starting to put much more requirement on actually the banks being more transparent about where they put the money, which company are you investing in, which company are you lending money to. And then gradually you have to move your portfolio so they are aligned with the sustainability goals and the climate goal in the future. And I think they also will have a challenge by the profitability in some of these sectors in the future. And what we have seen so far is, look at the mobile sector, for example, how fast these changes goes, especially in the technology sector. So in the economists usually look at the linear change, but they usually go exponential. So you usually get these kind of shocks. So I think, that they need to look at the portfolio in the future.
Yeah, interesting. You talk about shocks and not linear but exponential change. Just very briefly, for you guys representing businesses on this panel, how fundamentally different do you think your business will be in 20 years' time? I mean, talking about shipping first, Harold?
I think it will be, we will still transport goods and passengers, but I think I hope it will be done without emissions. So I think we will see a fundamental change.
So you said the technology is not there yet, but you think within 20 years there will be sort of capacity to deliver net zero emission shipping?
Yeah, that's our ambition.
Yeah, you're an ambitious sort of guy.
Yeah, but we have to be.
What about Enel? Is Enel going to be a fundamentally different company within 20 years?
Well, at least the price...
Will it exist in 20 years?
Well, of course. Hope so. Well, first of all, the price for green energy from wind will be decreased in, well, I don't know about percents, but at least in 2 times, I hope. Mm. And
will that be your main business, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of them.
You're becoming...
Renewables.
Renewables.
Not
you will be...
the wind, but
right.
renewables.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You see yourselves becoming a renewables business.
one of our companies in our NL group called NL Green Power. So we have to.
Yes, but it's only one of your companies. All right. And from the point of view of the oil services business,
I think that our members in Petroactive will still deliver commodities and services to the oil and gas industry in 20 to 30 years in the north. But it will be greener, and we are prepared actually to take on board also the renewable opportunities. So I think that our industry will also go in that direction.
Excellent. I'm tempted to squeeze one more question in if there is one, but then we're going to shift panels a little bit. Is there one more, or should we change the panel now? What do we think? It's always a bit like sort of a prison camp where the light scans. There's lots of questions. Oh my God, there's far too many questions. Don't worry, because we're going to have more questions in a moment when we shift the panel a bit. But I'll just take one question from the back, just because I haven't been to the back for a while. So you, sir, but make it quick, because then we're going to change the panel.
Sure. Hi, my name is Takeshi. I'm visiting from Iceland. Many of the speakers have touched from various angles on the ways in which you can encourage social and environmental responsibility in the business sector. I'm wondering if you can address how one can plan for respect of an indigenous labor market in the cultural specific situation of the Arctic.
Right. Yes. Well, we have touched on that, but I'm only going to allow one response. So who feels passionately they want to get into that, respecting the needs of the indigenous communities when it comes to jobs and future labour market? Well, between you decide.
Very quickly first, you have different kind of models, but first and foremost, that kind of every concession license that's being done in the Arctic should have a requirement on how to address the different users of an area. And it should be a through process as well, and not something that you just do for show and tell, but actually involving, actually having dialogue, and also respect that the use of an area is of conflict, and you as a company can't always win that.
And Tina, what were you going to say?
It's more and more pressure on actually on human rights and how that influence decision making as well. So I think the awareness is increasing around that.